Time. All right. Hi, Ron. Are you there?
Hey,
Hi, welcome. So today's episode is how much self-awareness do you have? Today is October 19th, and we are glad that we're having another conversation. So my first question that I wanted to ask is it's going to be a little bit different because you said something before we went live was you're a bit thrown. And as leaders, they are very familiar with being thrown. Maybe it's an inside language and not many people understand what being thrown is. So first of all, I would like you to explain what do you mean by thrown? And the second thing is what do what are different ways what does thrownness do for a leader?
I was writing an article last week, and this line that I had encountered, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, came back to me all of a sudden, and I was like, "Wow, that is so appropriate." It's a quote by the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset, Ortega y Gasset, in which he said, "Life is fired at us point blank."
Hmm.
So that's just what it is on the face of it. I'm not going to give the whole context. It's a great quote. You can go look it up. But if you Googled, life fired at you point blank, Ortega, you'd probably find it. And I can put links to it in the show notes here. But the whole idea is that we don't have the luxury of everything going according to plan.
Yes.
First of all, leaders have to have a good plan. But I think Clausewitz, the great strategist, war, theorist, said, all those great plans kind of go out the window as soon as the first shot's fired, right? You have to improvise in the moment. And so I won't talk about, the futility of planning because it really does serve a good purpose. We need plans. Leaders have to have plans, but you have to realize that your plans don't dictate how things are going to happen because things are just going to happen the way they do. And so things being thrown is like, oh, all of a sudden, like for this stream, we have a set of questions, we have a topic, we have, a certain way that I want to treat this. And then things come up and, it's not according to plan. It's not my expectations. And so I feel like thrown off. Or another word would be capsized or upset.
A
If
lot
you're
of
canoeing or paddling and then all of a sudden you hit the rapids that you didn't expect and you get capsized or upset.
This is not unfamiliar to many leaders. I mean, the pandemic has just thrown everybody off, whether
Yeah,
you're middle level, high level, or at the top of your helm. So we
right.
have this illusion and this idea that, you know, um, if we are the leader, we can always outsource. We get the funding, we will solve certain problems. Or if I basically farm out things. But sooner or later in life, or as you work through, life happens. Even if professionally things are going well, you have all the resources to help you be successful, family matters come up and you get thrown. So I find this a very useful conversation because leaders are human beings and human beings exist well when you're in relationship with other people. And all these relationships are not just in the professional context, they're personal as well. And so it is very useful to pay attention to how self aware you are in terms of managing your emotions and also taking care of business at work. So, my question is how do we know how self aware we are?
I had like a really good snappy response to that prepared in advance. How do we know how self-aware we are? And then when you ask it to me in the moment, I'm just like, I'm thinking about all those things that we were, discussing, like being thrown or being, upset, capsized in the moment. And it's like, yeah, how do we know how self-aware we are? Because
Mhm.
I've become much more aware of the fact that how I see myself, what I think my level of self-awareness is not always the reality.
Yes.
So
So
I'll give you an example. Um, I um, I like to have plans. I like to know, where we're going with things. And I also like to I think of myself as being a person who can be very flexible, very spontaneous in the moment. So the way I see myself is that um, I'm a good planner, and I also like to be spontaneous, and I can handle it all. And the reality of it is that I'm not a great planner, and I'm not that flexible. And so my self-concept, how I see myself, and the reality of how much actual awareness is something that I'm still very much learning and negotiating. And the earlier certainty that I had as a younger leader, oh, I see things so clearly, I know what it is, and just all that confidence is a little more measured, that I'm not quite so confident of all those things. And it's not because I don't have the stuff, it's because I've got a lot more experience. And so there's the fact that I know those things aren't true all the time. I know
so I
that
have
I'm
a
not a great planner. I know that I'm not, this or that. And so I think my self-awareness has actually gone up, even though in reality, my self-awareness is probably, if I were to rate it, is lower than I would have rated it 20 years ago.
So I have a little bit of cheat sheet here because I know you for over 3 decades, and I think if when I knew you back early, I mean, now early days, you wouldn't have such awareness in saying that you're inflexible, and you would, because one of the things I remember as you were practicing Aikido, which took many years, eventually you had 2 black belts in Aikido, and from white to brown to yellow, all the different colors. And I remember one of the things you said was how you realize how inflexible your body is. And if you have not gone through the training to become a shodan, you were not aware of it. So I would kin this work that you do, the EQ assessment, that you have insights about how leaders are, because we all come as people who lead, or most human beings, that I'm well aware of what to do and how to take care of the situation, flight and fight response, kind of like no, right? But your own personal journey of doing Aikido is just one sliver of helping you understand personally that you're really not as self aware of your body inflexibility. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's pivot to the assessment tool. Like, what would that review for a leader?
I guess you mentioned a tool, and we have tools that will help us measure our self-awareness. And um, I guess the first thing I would say is that, I know some people are skeptical, like, you know, can a tool really tell us how self-aware you are? Really?
Yeah.
And my first response to that skepticism would be, yeah, you're right, you know, because, we can game just about anything. you don't have to be a leader very long before you realize that um, people can be very devious. People can be very deceptive,
Oh my.
and I think one of the first big discoveries, and it's a disappointment, honestly, but is like, and I'm one of those people. I can be very devious and very deceptive, no
Okay.
matter how much I think of myself as being righteous and, in the right and only standing for truth and goodness.
Yes. What is it they say about the saints? The best saints are the worst sinners. Yeah. Yeah.
The person I think of when you bring that up is Augustine.
Mm.
Um, so, you know, he he's famous for his work called the Confessions because he
Mm.
was such a great sinner. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah. So,
So would humility be a hallmark of someone who is very great, very self-aware? Because when you read the Confessions, I'm just struck by how humble he is in the way he confesses, you know.
I think that's a great question, and it has a practical impact behind it. For this simple reason, you talk to psychologists, and especially those people in psychology who are very involved in measuring, psychometricians, we'd call them. They work with psychometric tests. So whether
Mhm.
that would look like a personality test or some sort of like, ways to measure, people's sort of makeup, how they see things, how they feel about things. Um, I think the current consensus among a lot of psychologists is Big Five. There's the Big Five personality theory that, hey, these are five things that we know are pretty, basic to everyone, and they're solid and they're empirical, and this is not junk science, and that's all. That's great. Until some folks came along, several years ago and questioned the Big Five and said, wait a minute, there's a sixth thing that we're overlooking here. And it's partly because a lot of the Big Five research and work was predominantly done in the Western world, Western countries. And as we added more to the database, they said, wait, there's a sixth item, which is it's besides these five things, which are like openness and extroversion, and I could go through the list of Big Five, but the point is there's a sixth item that has not included in Big Five, but it's been overlooked, and yet it's pretty big. It's called humility
Mm.
or humbleness. And so Big Five should make way for Big Six.
Okay, that's good. Interesting you
And so when
mentioned
you
that.
bring up that about
Mhm.
humility, I absolutely agree. And the interesting thing about this brings us also to a little bigger context, is you always have to look at where your work is being done and what are the limits, what are the blinders that you have. So most of modern psychology has been done in the West, and we need a more global perspective because this H factor was especially brought up by I think a South Korean researcher, but it's been validated among Chinese and other folks. So in the Asian world, in the Asian context, humility or humbleness as a personality factor is absolutely, it's like a, yeah, of course. You know what? Of course that's fundamental to human beingness and leaders. And we have to account for how much someone is either narcissistic, or they're clueless, or are they humble, are they clear about these things, and they hold their own greatness lightly.
I think the many leaders that you work with, they're not braggadocious kind of people because you choose your clients, and most of them are humble,
Yeah.
and that's what makes them successful. But there is always this line that has kind of stayed with me. The moment you realize you're humble, you're not. It's a very deep line. So is that kind of like, wow? because we're always we're imperfect people. You know, we're always toggling between staying humble and then being braggadocious. I mean, that's just who
Yeah.
we are as people. And
Yeah.
so we try really hard, at least for those people that we enjoy working with, people who want to stay humble, be kind, work
Right.
hard, stay humble, be kind.
Right.
But there's
Right.
also this part about the moment when we are in that space of in humility, we realize that we're really not. I think that happens when we stop learning. So our sons, one of our sons, when he surpassed me, I coached him on his. I even put myself in just a context for the audience here. I have a bilingual education from Singapore, and so living in the U.S., being a monolingual culture, I wanted my children to have the exposure to Mandarin Chinese. So when Ron had the opportunity to do consulting in Shanghai, China, I said yes, because I know the immersive environment would do them good. And when we came back, I got myself certified as a Texas licensed teacher with the TA, Texas Education Agency, where I could teach Chinese K to 12. And I did that because I can speak fluently Mandarin Chinese and write it in simplified Chinese characters. It doesn't mean that I know the pedagogy and the testing methods of what it takes to bring someone to ace AP Chinese. So a little bit of story there. One of the things, so my oldest son aced it, and he went beyond me, and he took his EE in the IB program, and came across this group, this group of people he called 饮食, which is the Chinese hermits. So when you said that humility is not very discussed, he brought to mind into my space and understanding of 饮食 and the importance of 饮食 and that group of people representing the forever learning spirit. So you're a forever learner, right? Yes, you love to learn.
That word forever kind of threw me, but I mean, I would say
Just like
I'm a continual learner. I'm a lifelong learner. I don't know about forever.
okay, so I came from the education sphere as well. So we have this, but every
You're
industry has their own
you're
buzzwords.
committing me to eternity, and I'm not sure for eternity I'm gonna be learning.
All right, sorry about that. So sometimes buzzwords from in specific niches, kind of like yeah, yes, you're right. So tell me more about like what are you have you is it hard to talk about self-awareness? You know, and why is that?
I personally don't find it hard to talk about
Let's talk about
self-awareness. I find
humility.
it
Let's talk
very
about
difficult
humility.
to practice self-awareness.
Yes, because humility is one of the key hallmarks of self-awareness. So I'm like, so is it hard to be humble? I think there's a song that says it's hard to be humble. I think it's a country song, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I hadn't thought about this whole angle of, what the way that we're approaching this, but I think there really is something to it. Um, I just know, and we mentioned this on a previous episode, I I know that if you just bring up the topic among leaders, about self-awareness, and if you were to ask, like, show of hands, how many people think that they're above average, you're going to get, it. If you have everyone close their eyes for one thing, close your eyes, but raise your hand if you think you're above average. You're going to get a room full of hands raised, and so the point is that we all kind of rate ourselves higher on self-awareness than we probably deserve. And it takes real humility to admit or to face the fact that, hey, I may not be as self-aware as I'd like to think I am.
Mm,
And, it sounds like a joke, but what you were saying earlier too is like those who think that they're humble are probably not. And it takes a certain degree of self-awareness to, to actually demonstrate humility, but to not be so self-aware of your own humility.
That's right. Not be so self-aware, humility, because that's the quote was saying, the moment you realize you're being humble, you're not. The moment. So it's almost like humility is like the iOS we have on our, it's like kind of like it's like in the background. It's updating itself, you know, and you're
But
not aware of it. You
but
should just
Angela,
go
I
on
can also
continuing life.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
cutting in, but I'm like, I can also empathize with the person watching right now who's
Mm.
listening to this and saying, "Ah, so what's the point?" It's
Yeah.
like it's a
Yeah.
that's a self-defeating cycle. If it's like, Ron and Angela, you're saying like, leaders, self-aware leader, like it's a something we should desire. It's something we should, cultivate. And yet, once you become aware that you're humble, you're not so humble. It's like that's a self-defeating cycle. So it's like,
Yeah.
aren't you just setting me up to fail?
Yeah. Great question, isn't it? How we actually don't like to fail.
We don't like to fail. We don't like to be pointed out for that. Hey, you're actually kind of full of yourself. You're not that humble.
Yeah.
You really do care. I care about what I look like, even though I don't look anything special. But I care that my hair looks, pretty. What little hair I have left, it looks straight and all that. And then I'm shaved. I care about those things before we have this live stream. I groom and take care of myself. I care about what I look like. Um, and we're all that way, I think. I think most people, we care about those things. And so we're not that humble. And yet, the paradox is that humility, humbleness is definitely a trait that goes hand in
Yes.
hand with self-awareness.
And when I meet a leader who is humble, I'm thinking some of the people we met, I just want to follow them. I don't know. Whatever you do, I'm signed on. There's a certain quality, so I just that's why I enjoy people, leaders who are willing to explore that field.
So I guess in some ways, this question for today's episode, how much self-awareness do you have, is a bit of a trap because the more you claim to have,
Mm.
are you really that self-aware and are you humble? And the more that you're aware you're humble, you're probably not.
I think I'm pretty
So
self-aware, but
how do we
yeah,
measure that? How do we get out of this loop,
yeah.
you know? And there are ways. There are ways. We should explore those a little bit more, I think.
I like to hear you say that because much as I don't like to learn new things, I guess I'm a forever learner. I'm gonna stick with that. um, um, because I noticed something about me is like when I get really proud of myself, I get really like just I guess the beingness of me just come across as like I got this, like I know this. And much as I enjoy being in that space, I really don't because I really like to come from I guess some people call it the trending thing that people call it curious. And I don't think it's just curious, like a pretend and nod, and just, kind of like, be curious because you really have an agenda to know something. I guess when I say, I, I think I am, no, I think I am. I like to think I am self aware, but I really like to be not self aware. I really like to be clueless. That doesn't even make sense. Doesn't even make sense. I like to be clueless because then people can fill me in on all their opinions, perceptions, and I'll be like, oh, is that what everybody's thinking? You know?
So
Yeah.
I
Like,
know that
learn.
not
Yeah.
everyone has seen this, and so not
Mhm.
everyone will get the reference.
Yeah.
But on Apple Plus, I think there was this series Ted Lasso that a lot of people have seen. And the thing about Ted Lasso, this American, not so successful football coach who's drafted to coach a English soccer team and lands in the UK in this failing franchise. It's a setup, but the point is that he looks like he's clearly a duck out of water. He's not in his element, and yet he's very comfortable. And and there is a certain method to his bumbling ways, that he knows something about human nature. He
Mm,
knows something about how to get a team together and people believing in themselves. And so Ted Lasso is this unassuming dolt that everyone wants to use as a punching bag, and people are calling him names on the street and all that. And yet he's also underrated, and that's his secret strength, is that people underrate him. And the scene in the pub where he's challenged to a game of darts by this fellow who really wants to show him up and just assumes that Ted, has no ability, in darts, finds out that actually Ted is pretty good at darts. And as they're throwing darts, Ted says something about, the thing I found in life is that people lose their curiosity and they'd stop asking questions. And when you're not curious and you think where you're coming from, like you've already boxed people, you've labeled people, you've already pegged folks. You think you know who they are and what they're about, and you're completely wrong. And as he throws his winning dart and hits the bullseye and wins the game, shows up this pompous person, it kind of puts a exclamation point on what Ted Lasso's character has been saying about curiosity. And I think that gets to the core of what we're discussing here, is that you say you want to be clueless. And I would say that's a humble way to say you're actually very curious and you want to stay curious. You want to remain curious. You want to keep asking questions. It's kind of like Socrates, who is one of the smartest men of all time, one of the greatest philosophers, simply because he said, I know I don't know. And I'm willing to ask the questions and look silly and be the butt of the joke.
I think that is why I admire leaders who are willing to, they, people move up professionally or they achieve certain things.
Yeah.
They're willing to just like go to a different industry or take on a new assignment or do totally something different.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so, they're not trying to keep and grow or, like hoard or whatever. They're just like, okay, done, and move on. I'm gonna try something different. And there's something very interesting about it. I was just listening to a podcast of I think the CEO, the Salesforce CEO India, the woman, I can't remember her name, but she spent 40 years in an institutionalized system of the banking system in India. And she was willing to just pivot, become the CEO for Salesforce. And she didn't talk big things so that it was way over my head. But one of the things that she said was, you know, learning something new was is something like as simple as trying to take care of myself because, I'm not having to deal with San Francisco time, you know, having meetings then. And I was like, oh, as simple as that. That, that change requires self-care, being aware of like, no, my body can't take this. So I need to plan my day in
Mhm.
a way where I could be, my best form when I'm talking to the people in San Francisco.
Right.
I was like, oh. I can do baby steps of changes, I just I love learning from, wonderful, amazing leaders like that, teach me tips that I can use. So if I'm on a path to always, like, can we measure it? Why do we need to measure it? And how accurate must we be? I mean, because I don't think many people want to be like bumbling idiots, you know? I mean, I know the CEO of Salesforce India. She was a very confident. She knows what she's saying. She knows what she's doing. She's
Right.
not pretending to be, like I don't know, kind of like me most of the time, or sometimes in situations, you know. So, how do leaders stay in the zone of? Is there such thing as a perfect self-awareness zone? And other tips to get there?
Well, I think one of the keys that we've just mentioned is about curiosity. And so, um, if you find yourself very confident and in the know, like, you've got things figured out and your knowledge is something that's more on display rather than something that is being challenged
Mm,
on an ongoing basis, you're probably not going to be expanding your self-awareness.
mm.
And that's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the truth.
But you're a leader. You're supposed to know everything. I mean, most of the thing you need to know. At least know. You need to know. If I'm on a ship with a captain, at least I know. I need to know the captain. Know. I need the captain to know where we're sailing toward.
That's a myth. So the myth is that you have to know everything. So if captain, you need to know what you're sailing toward, yes. But at every moment of the voyage, do you know where you are and what's going on and what's up next, and what the weather's going to do to you, what the winds are going to do to you, what the crew's going to do, what they're plotting below decks? Can you know everything all the time? No, never. And the
Mhm.
great myth is that expectation that you just said, that the leader should know everything.
At least most parts. Like some, at least. Or are you saying that leaders don't have to know, or we just go along once, like a creative, like just we just do the thing in front of us and the next thing in front of us? Because I'm assuming that leaders can't afford to do that, like a creative, sort of like, the creative is led by the spirit. It's like, we just do what we, kind of like feel inclined to do. Our spirit at peace, we just take that step. A leader, you need to have the brain to come in thinking of, how your decisions is going to affect your company.
I think what sets apart a leader is that you you do realize there are definite limits to your own knowledge,
Mm,
and you also acknowledge that there's limits to your organization. That we haven't, like, got a lock, a monopoly on all knowledge within our organization either. That there's a lot of things happening around us that we don't know about, and we don't know that we don't know. And therefore, whether you want to call it paranoia, healthy paranoia, or curiosity, or whatever, it's like leaders are constantly looking for, how do we pick up on signals? How do I pick up on signals, for one thing, both for my team and also from the market and from customers and prospective customers and people outside? How do I pick up on those things? Competitors, but also how do I code that into the DNA, into the culture, so that it's not all dependent on you, but in fact you've got a bunch of other people around you who are similarly curious and a little more modest about their grasp, that they know it all, and they can do it all. And in fact, are like, I may be really good at what I do right now, today, but I have no guarantee that there's not going to be something in the market that's going to shift. So, you and I were talking about this just this morning, before we came on live stream. We were talking about something of this software platform that we use a lot in our business. You've got like, several thousand designs tied up in that. And we were talking about what happens if that software platform has a technical problem or a policy change or whatever, but it's like all that stuff goes away. Do we have a backup? And I think that's a good question to look at, just from a standpoint of business continuity. But it's like leaders are willing to ask the unfathomable, which is like, the question that other people aren't even, thinking of or willing to look at, because a lot of people just say, well, you know what? If that big platform, let's just, let's say Google, if Google were to go out of business, we would all be in a boatload of trouble, right? Because so much of what we do, Gmail and YouTube that we're broadcasting here on, and Google Drive and Google Docs and Google Sheets, so it's like we depend on it. If Google went down, we would all be in serious trouble.
Which Google Plus communities happened. It went down.
Exactly. If you had your business, built on Google Plus,
yes,
then you already experienced that.
everything that was built there just went away that I did.
So the platform can pull back. They can pull back from a particular product that they were trialing or trying to develop or putting resources into, and the platform itself can implode. I mean, MySpace is gone. And there's some people listening, MySpace, what is that? It's like, well, they're the ones that were before Facebook. But anyway, the point is that these things can go away. And as a leader, you're thinking about, how do we plan for the things that are unplannable? It's hard to anticipate when, where, or if it's even going to happen. But the fact that you even ask the question and you're willing to, like have a backup plan or have a safety, have a way out, shows that you're willing to not just be curious, but also like take steps to safeguard to the degree you can. And it's, doable, it's feasible, and, it's a reasonable thing that you would back up your systems and not just trust that, hey, you know what, the platform, all my stuff is there in the cloud, it's good.
So it sounds like leaders are constantly making self-aware decisions. So what is something that you want to bring into the marketplace that will up the game?
Yeah, so the thing is that I think every leader should ask themselves the question, how self-aware am I? And how do I know? And we could scale the answer to that all different ways. So here's what I mean. Like, you can begin by just, doing a little quick and easy self-assessment, several questions, and rate yourself. How self-aware am I? Right? You can get those from any source. I've got one. I put it up on YouTube. It's, it's done fairly well. Quite a few people have got out and answered that. So let me just see. I'll put that in the comments so you can see that. If you want to check your own EQ, there's a self-test, 10 questions, very quick. Several of those questions are directly about self-awareness, but all of them have some impact on your ability to, size things up. How self-aware are you about other people and that sort of thing? So that's kind of a very low level. You could start out with a self-assessment that's, very simple, and just get a kind of a feel, a benchmark for where you are. And I would say that's a step up from what I would call just a very subjective sense about, I'm pretty much a self-aware person. Because that subjective feeling about your self-awareness is not really very solid, right? It needs to be challenged a little bit. So having a set of questions that you have to answer is a step up. Now, if you want to go another step up, you would, not just take a very, easy, free self-assessment, but you might engage in a little more rigorous process where you contract with a development firm, where a coaching firm where they specialize in this, and they can give you a scientific sort of assessment of your EQ, and you go through the results with a coach, and you're kind of facilitated through a process, and you can really get a much clearer, better reading of your level of EQ or your self-assessment, self-awareness. So that's a level up. If you want to go another level up, you would probably say, it's not enough just for me to look at myself. I need to get the input of people around me who know me well. And so we would get like a 360 view of ourselves. Again, you need the help of other people to, kind of do that process. There are some self-service sites on the internet, but generally you're going to contract with a coaching firm to do a 360.
And do you do that?
You're asking me how to get a
No, do you do
360?
that? No, do you do that?
Yes, yeah, we do. Lead Skill does. We offer that, and there are a number of providers out on the market, and so you can go searching for that. But yeah, we do that too. As you move, through these different levels, I actually did a video about self-awareness and how to build it, and I mentioned these many different sources, and I gave some ideas. It's like a 10 or 11-minute video. It's the one where I start talking about, a rock. And so you can find that on my channel. I'll put the link in here in a second too. But my point is that there are different ways to measure self-awareness. And they're on a scale of both complexity and rigor. And the whole purpose, to me, of measuring your self-awareness is you need to know where you are. You have to have a baseline, or it's like a sense of where I'm starting from. And then you can measure over time whether you're improving, whether you're gaining on it, or whether you're pretty much flat, or maybe you're not gaining self-awareness. Maybe you're sliding. That's not the way that most of us want to think of it working, but it can happen that way.
Anything else that you would like to touch on for our topic today? How much self-awareness do you have that we might not have covered?
I'll just share that for myself, making this a point that I revisit on a fairly frequent basis. And when I say fairly frequent, I'm saying if I go back through my journals just this year, the last 10 months, I have intentionally revisited the question probably every month, at least once a month. I've gone back over and looked at my own level of self-awareness, and I refer to the results of my own EQ test that I took to get that sort of benchmark that I have talked about. And I've asked myself the question, where am I growing? What do I still need to keep paying attention to? Or what do I need to recommit? What area do I need to work on? Is it, learning more about how other people see me? Because that's the part of self-awareness that we overlook. We all overlook it. We think self-awareness is about how I see myself. And that's just half of it. The other half is, how do other people see me? Do I know how I show up in the eyes of other people? Because that's part of the key to how much influence you have and how effective you are as a leader, is to know something about how you're showing up in the eyes of others. And so I revisit these things and I look at it, and I would say every leader needs to have more than just a good wish or an intention about increasing their self-awareness, they need to have practices in place that have them really look at this. And some I know work with a coach, an executive coach, who will keep bringing up these questions on a fairly regular basis, and that's a great way to do it. Or to have peers that they are accountable to. Maybe it's a board members who are peers who would, challenge you on some of these things and challenge, how do you know that? How do we know this data is solid? How do we know what we're reading is reality? And, you know, I think that every leader has to really take self-awareness and humility to heart, and not just have a good intention about it, but have practices to back it up.
I want you to say a little bit more about, like, because I know that it's your heart to help leaders up their game, to upskill themselves professionally and personally. I know that you are not suggesting or advocating it because um, I don't know, the word self deception comes into mind. And the example I could think of is like in marketing, we're always talking about managing perceptions, how the message is coming across. And now we have personal branding, which Tom Peters talked about it years back. And now it's coming into full play, whole society. Everyone wants to brand themselves in some way or the other, even a grandmother. Um, how we are coming across to people, how we're seen by people, the legacy that that we are leaving behind. And I think you're not advocating that we all take these self-assessment tests, whether it's simple, complicated, or 360, so that we look good.
No,
Yeah.
that's a pretty ego-driven exercise.
Yeah. I was like, oh, is this how I'm seen in the world? Okay, I'm gonna up that, or I need to tone down that. I don't think that's what you know. So like I'm like, but I'm with you. I want to know. I wish I'm a better interviewer so that I can pull that knowledge out of your brain, because there's just so much value in becoming self-aware for good purposes. And not deception to other people, or worse, self-deception.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't even know if there's a question in there. A- Again, the only, if there's a question, it would be like give me one that would be make me feel like, yeah, I really need to think about this self-awareness thing. I think one you said was journal, like looking at asking yourself the same question every month. Is that right in your journal? What you said? Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my practices, and I
Yeah.
would advocate that for other leaders to have a similar practice, if not, using a journal. Some leaders don't journal, but having some way to revisit it, and you don't have to like just remember this, but it's going to come up on its own. Like you've set it up you've automated the process. It's going to come back, and you're going to have to revisit it and bump up, against it again. Um,
And go ahead. Okay, are we cutting out? And how
no,
amazing
but
it is if a leader can do that and then enroll that team to do the same thing. It's like we're
yeah,
not talking just a multiplying effect, but it's just sort of like you have with all these things coming at us in so many ways, so many fashion, we
right,
can't work alone. We have to collab. So it's like,
right,
how amazing the things that we can achieve when there is a team on the same page, talking about the essential questions, growing the same way, in the same light, not to have cookie cutter kind of result, but everybody
right,
is on their own self-awareness journey,
right.
you know, working on things and then sharing that data and helping one another to become better versions of themselves. and also be pointed the ugly truths, you know,
It
about.
it it takes courage and commitment to
Mm,
see this through, but it can be done. So here's one story, that um, I found, really helpful, and it gave me some encouragement too. Um, Alan Mulally was a leader who came from Boeing, and he was recruited to head up Ford Motor Company, the car maker. And um, when he started at Ford, this is going back a few years, but when he started at Ford, he found a culture where the top leaders of the company, it was not acceptable to like not have your stuff together. And so when they came together into meetings, it's like no one would admit they were having any problems. But if you look at Ford Motor Company as a entity, the whole company, they were losing billions of dollars every year. So the direction of the company was clearly in trouble, and they were losing, multiple billions of dollars. But when he started his leadership meetings and he started a practice where, okay, weekly, we're going to come together, we're going to take a look at kind of the health of the business overall. And each one of you are going to report on your division, and we're going to say we're green, yellow, or red. Green is a-okay, everything's cool. Yellow is we got some danger signs, and red is like, hey, we got a problem here. And the first week, all of his top leaders brought green, 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 green,
I
green.
was
It's
thinking of
all
that.
green lights.
No one was to bring red.
No one is going to admit that their division is struggling.
Mm,
And yet he said, well, this is interesting because as a company, they're clearly losing billions, $19 billion in the previous year, and they're still losing money. And no one is admitting that they've got a problem.
yeah.
And so, anyway, the point is that over the course of a couple of weeks, he just let it go on for a couple of weeks. But like by the third week, this one guy, I think that at that time is the Ford Edge, but it was like, they were trying to bring a new model to market. They ran into a problem, and this guy really had to face the am I going to call this out in the meeting, or do I just kind of slide it by and hope that we're going to get this resolved, and so I don't have to admit it publicly, and we're going to get it handled behind the scenes, and I can look good by within a month or so. But the danger of that is if they didn't get it handled behind the scenes, it would come out and be very public. So he was trying to weigh, like, do I take the risk or not take the risk? And, will I get it handled and I'll look good anyway? And in the end, he took a very courageous decision to just admit, like, hey, we got a problem, and just, come clean with it. And he did. And the interesting thing is Alan Mulally in the meeting said, okay, over here, this guy, Craig has a problem. Who can help him with that? And all of a sudden, these other executives started firing off like their suggestion. Oh, yeah, we ran into an issue like that over here in this product line. Da, da, da. And they all were helpful to the guy who had a problem. But what was really going on is they were all looking to see how was the new CEO going to handle this, because previously the culture was you couldn't show up to a meeting and not have your stuff together without being fired. It was a very punitive culture.
Yeah.
And whenever the new leader demonstrated, hey, we're not going to shoot you or fire you for admitting you're having problems, then by the third week after this first guy took that step, everyone was reporting red. Like they got problems. And
That
suddenly
explains
it became
losses,
clear
yes.
people were telling the
Yeah.
truth about, that they were struggling. Each division was struggling. But up
Mm,
until that time, no one would admit it. And
mm.
this is happening at the top level of a top, Fortune, 100 company in the US. And it's like, wow, that level of self-deception and deception, that I'm maintaining among my peers is so pervasive. It gets repeated over and over in corporations and companies, big and small.
So I'm really learning my takeaways with this conversation that a self-awareness leader, I don't know if a book coming out of the every every expert seemed to have come some kind of book with tips on it. And so the takeaway is a self-aware leader, at least, if I were to do the DNA of the person, humility and courageous is courageous, and they don't shoot the messenger. Yeah. And just a couple of things, and
Yeah.
be kind of equanimous about handling whatever bad news that come their way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, especially the messenger delivering the bad news about yourself, that you aren't so self-aware as you might think.
Mm.
Because I'm not asked for pity here, but I'm the coach, and so I've been the one to deliver bad news to leaders before, and it's kind of typical that you'll see shock, denial, even anger, and people will, sometimes will turn on me and question, well, something's wrong with your test, your assessment, or you shouldn't say it that way, or that's wrong. It's like, people will resist,
Mm.
and you can't take it personally. But you know leaders who have character will get over that emotional upset and usually clean it up and say, hey, sorry. It's like, um and we'll be able to forge a way to go forward from here. You don't
Yeah.
shoot the messenger. But I mean, it's kind of typical that people will have a reaction, and I've learned to anticipate that,
Mm.
and it's okay, it's not personal.
Yeah.
But how quickly do you recover when you're capsized, when you're thrown, when you're upset?
Yes. So get back to the original thing about
Back to where we started.
where we started about thrownness. So if you have not
Yeah,
caught if you just caught the tail end of this conversation, maybe you want to hit replay and go to the very beginning. I'm
yeah.
actually sounding like a YouTuber now. So okay. So all right. So close us out because I know that you have another call to take at in about 15 minutes. So close us out and make your intros, outros, or whatever. Yes. Ron, thank you for
I
this conversation. Yeah.
I just have to say thank you for being with us, watching, and engaging with the conversation, and we welcome your comments. So drop a comment to us, or a question if you've got it. If you got an idea for a future episode, or something that you'd like to know about pertaining to self-aware leadership, love to hear that. And you can find more about Lead Skill by going to leadskill.com. And we're going to continue to roll out these episodes. And so future episodes, we do this every Wednesday about midday Central Time. So you can join us live, and we would welcome that, or you can catch it on the replay. And so what we're going to be looking at is, in the future episode, the next one next week, is what is one powerful yet practical um, practice or exercise that you can engage in to grow your self-awareness as a leader. And that will be something that you don't want to miss. We're going to go deeper into it. And beyond that, in future episodes, we're going to look at each one of the different domains of emotional intelligence, self-awareness being one of them, but also, okay, how do you take it the next step and practice self-control, or stay on top of motivation? Or what about the social side of things? How do I apply self-awareness to, my understanding of other people, empathy, or interpersonal skills? So we'll be looking at each one of those in turn, and we welcome you to come along with us in the journey. Angela, thank you for your participation. I mean, you are clearly the part of the team that's, pulling a lot of the weight here, and you bring a lot to our conversations, and I appreciate your engagement.
This is new to me, and thanks for being patient and learning to log together with me in a new space. Yeah, thank you.
We do have other videos, other resources. I've put some of the links, and I would just invite you, binge all of our content that you can get, that you're interested in. And at the point where you decide, hey, I want to do something with this, and I think Ron might be able to help us, or at least I want to explore that, don't be hesitant to reach out and ask us, because I'm willing to give a little bit of my time to see if there's a fit for us to work together. And if there's not, I've got a number of people in my professional network I could refer you to if there's someone else, or other resources that I might, be aware of that you haven't heard of, or maybe you just want a recommendation. So let us know how we can help you, because we stand ready to serve.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Wow.
joining us today. We'll catch you next week. Self-aware leader.